Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic goblin noise!
Hey gang! Using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCG Player. And if you'd like to join the Generic Goblin Gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game is a bit of a rarity since I filmed it at face-to-face in Montreal. It's also a bit more of a budget-friendly game, with none of these decks being particularly expensive. Sam is playing his Mizzix deck, keeping Aether Snatch, Factor Fiction, Sigil Tracer, Mountain, Swiftwater Cliffs, Preordain, and an Island. Antoine is playing Roon, keeping Blossoming Sands, Rupture Spire, Darksteel Ingot, Mulldrifter, Martial's Anthem, and Swords to Plowshares. Kevin is playing Hapatra, keeping Dark Ritual, Journey to Eternity, 2 Forests, a Swamp, Awakening Zone, and Arbor Elf. When we filmed this, Mistform was still new and was relatively cheap, and I kept 3 islands, Swan Song, Commit, Vidalcan Aether Mage, and Myriad Landscape. Kevin wins the die roll and starts us off. Kevin plays a Forest and casts Arbor Elf. I play a Myriad Landscape, which comes in tapped. Sam plays an Island and casts Preordain. He scries 2, then draws. Antoine draws and plays a Plains. Kevin plays a Swamp and is able to cast Hapatra. He then hits me with the Arbor Elf, passing. I play an Island, and 2 mana gets me a Shapesharer. Sam plays a tapped Swiftwater Cliffs, gaining 1 life, and he passes. Antoine plays a Rupture Spire, and taps his Plains to pay for its enter the battlefield cost, and then passes turn. Kevin draws for turn, and goes to combat, hitting Antoine for 2. This lets him use Hapatra's trigger to put a -1/-1 counter onto my Shapesharer, and also gets to make a 1/1 green snake token. In his second main phase, he plays an Ichor Rats, which enters and gives everyone a poison counter. I draw for turn and play an Island. I then pass to Sam. Sam plays an Island as well, passing. Antoine goes for the hat trick, dropping the 3rd island this turn cycle, and then taps out for a Darksteel Ingot. Kevin plays a Forest and goes to combat. He hits me with the Rats, and Sam gets hit with Hapatra. Kevin uses the Hapatra trigger and puts a -1/-1 counter on herself, and makes a 1/1 snake token. At the end of Kevin's turn, I sacrifice the Myriad Landscape to find 2 islands. For my turn, I draw, play an Island, and pass. Sam draws, and plays a Mountain, also passing. Antoine plays an Opal Palace, and hard casts a Mulldrifter. He draws 2 as it enters, and more importantly, has a blocker now. Kevin plays a Swamp, and goes to combat. He swings at me with the Rats again, and Sam with Hapatra. Before damage, I use Commit to put the Rats second from the top of Kevin's library, and Sam then takes the 1. Kevin has the Hapatra trigger, put a -1/-1 counter onto the Mulldrifter, making another snake token. In his second main phase, Kevin moves to cast Awakening Zone, which I counter with Swan Song. I play an Island for turn, and pass. At the end of turn, Sam casts Factor Fiction, picking Antoine. He reveals his top 5, and gets 2 piles, resulting in these. Sam picks the pile with Mystic Confluence and 2 other cards. Sam's turn has him drawing, playing an Island, and passing. Typical blue players. Antoine plays a tapped Seaside Citadel and casts Roon in his main phase. With nothing else, he passes to Kevin. Kevin draws for turn and casts a Blood Artist in his main phase. At this point, Sam realizes he should have discarded 1 at the end of turn, and does so. Kevin then heads to combat, with Hapatra hitting Sam again, and the very Swan I gave to Kevin hitting me for 2. He gets to put a -1/- counter onto the Mulldrifter again, which happens, and it dies. This has the Blood Artist triggering, and Kevin drains me for 1. Kevin then casts Animate Dead, and steals the Mulldrifter, drawing 2 as it enters. He plays a land for turn, and untaps a force with the Arbor Elf. Icarats then hits the stack once more, but Sam counters it with a Mystic Confluence, making Kevin pay 3 more or have it countered, and drawing 2. Kevin can't pay the 3, and the spell is countered. At the end of turn, I Wizard Cycle Vidalcan Aether Mage to go and find a Wizard. It's Azami, and I put her to hand. For my turn, I draw and cast Azami. I tap her to her own ability, drawing a card, and play a Griffin Canyon. I then tap the rest of my mana for an Amoeboid Changeling, and pass to Sam. Sam casts a Goblin Electromancer in his main phase, and passes. Antoine plays a Blossoming Sands, gaining 1 life as it enters, and plays his own copy of Azami. Oh, I see you're a man of culture and refinement as well. He then swings Roon at Sam, dealing 4, and passes turn. Kevin untaps and draws, moving to combat. Hapatra heads at me this time, while the Swan goes at Sam. I block Hapatra with the Amoeboid, and then tap it to Azami's ability to draw a card before it's taken out. Sam also gets smacked by 2 for the birds, and with the Blood Artist seeing the Amoeboid dying, drains me for 1. In Kevin's second main phase, he brings back Hapatra and passes. I draw and play an island. I cast Mistform Ultimus, and then a Grand Architect, passing to Sam. At the end of turn, Sam casts Opt and scries 1 and then draws a card. Sam plays a mountain for turn and brings up the magical mistress Mizzix. He casts Seething Song, gaining an experience counter and then 5 red mana. Some of that mana goes into Tezzeret's Gambit as Sam pays 2 life instead of the blue Phyrexian mana. He gains an experience counter from Mizzix and then decides to proliferate his experience counters and also the poison counters on his opponents. He also draws 2 cards. Sam then uses that red mana floating and taps 1 blue to overload a reduced costing Cyclonic Rift. With the spell in the stack, Antoine and I tap some wizards to hopefully draw into a counter. But unfortunately fail. As a result of our failure, our permanents get bounced back to hand. Sam then passes. Antoine untaps and draws. He plays a Plains and recasts his Darksteel Ingot. He then recasts Roon and passes, having to discard down to 7. Kevin plays a Temple of the False God for turn and casts a Dark Ritual to float 3 black mana. He recasts the Blood Artist and then Hapatra. Scavenging Ooze is a new friend for Kevin, and he passes to me. I untap, playing a Rogue's Passage as my land for turn. Azami comes back, and I then cast Clone. It comes in as a copy of Roon, and I pass to Sam. Sam looks at his graveyard, and then plays an island. He plays an overloaded Mizzix's Mastery, gaining an experience counter, and then exiles all instants and sorceries from his yard. He's able to cast them without paying for their cost, and he starts off by casting a Vandal Blast and targeting the Darksteel Ingot. This is mostly done so he can cast an Aether Snatch on his own spell and gain another experience counter. Sam is then able to cast a Firemind's Foresight, gaining another experience counter, and goes to tutor for a 1, 2, and 3 drop instant spell. He reveals Frantic Search for the 3, Counterspell for the 2, and Fall of the Titans as the 1, putting them to hand and then shuffling. We then see Preordain, scrying 2, and bottoming 1, and then drawing a card. He then casts Opt, scrying 1, and drawing a card. He casts Tezzeret's Gambit again, gaining 2 more cards, and proliferates the poison counters on an opponent, and his own experience counter. Sam then casts his Mystic Confluence, returning Roon to Antoine's hand, Azami to mine, and Hapatra to Kevin. With the spell in the stack, I exile a card to cast Misdirection, and change the target for Azami to Mizzix. Sam unfortunately is ready for this though, using Swan Song to counter that, and the original creatures are then bounced. He then casts a Factor Fiction again, with Sam having Kevin make the piles this time. Kevin is pretty sure we're dead anyway, and makes the fabled pile of 5 and 0. Sam, sadly, cannot misclick in real life, and does not take the 0 pile. Sam then quickly recast the Seething Song, and then a normal Cyclonic Rift on a token, and we realized the earlier Confluence should have bounced Azami and Hapatra, fixing it. Sam then plays Frantic Search, untapping 3 lands, drawing 2 cards, and then discarding 2. He counts up the amount of spells he's cast this turn, which honestly isn't a great sign, and he casts a Sigil Tracer. He then casts a Temporal Fissure, and we're pretty sure he's enough to bounce all of our permanents at this point, so we just concede the game to Sam. Game review time. So today is a classic example of leaving a Mizzix player alone and not taking them out first. As you saw, even with a budget build, it took Sam very little other than a few lands to be able to get some crazy spells going off on his turn. We also probably didn't have to scoop after the Temporal Fissure, but when we didn't have any lands to play and Sam had a grip full of cards and all the mana and all the creatures, it didn't seem like much of a game at that point. As you saw with my Mistform deck, it was one of the earlier iterations, and unfortunately, all I seemed to draw was lands. Kevin's Hapatra deck was a budget build, but I saw a lot of cards that I normally see. Stuff with Infect works really well with her, and I think the only thing that he was really missing was a sacrifice outlet to abuse those snake tokens. I think the only thing that Antoine wasn't able to do this game was really interact with people. He seemed to be hitting his land drops, he had decent value creatures, he was able to cast his commander, and he even attacked Sam. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.